Do you think the Ana thing is like a breaking point? The thing I found weird about watching it happen with Vosh and ContraPoints, especially, was that
people seem to have a lot of animosity for the Young Turks and for Ana right now. And I think it hurts too that Ana is a little bit older and she's more grounded in reality, so it's hard for her to buy into a lot of the
This idea that there was a dual strategy of violence and non-violence is not taken seriously by anyone, as far as I know, in academia. I don't think it's actually that controversial to say that Zionism has a lot of control over American foreign policy, but a lot of that's to do with Christianity as well, like Christian Zionism.
Sure, but
was there not a streamer who tried to say that your family were slave owners?
Oh yeah, I read a really interesting paper recently. A friend sent me this, and it was an academic paper detailing the differences between echo chambers and epistemic bubbles. And what the paper goes into talk about is that like an epistemic bubble is just like you have a certain amount of friends, you subscribe to a certain amount of news sources, and you just kind of see all the same information. And so because you're in like an epistemic bubble, you tend to have like certain opinions that you get from said epistemic bubble. But to break people out of an epistemic bubble, usually you just have to show them some new information. So maybe like asking somebody like, well, what does mRNA mean? Or like, what is this? Like generally it's like, they'll see it like, oh shit, okay, I haven't seen this. And then like very, like a little bit slowly, but you can kind of move people out of epistemic bubbles like pretty easily. But that the really harmful thing the paper referred to were echo chambers. And the dangerous part about an echo chamber is that epistemic truth can only come from one source, and external epistemic truths are constantly invalidated, and every epistemic outer source reinforces the inner source, and that breaking somebody out of an echo chamber is significantly more difficult because of the intentional unreliance or the intentional discrediting of every type of like external source of truth. It's just like interesting because it talks about like, the differences that people fall into these and like the different strategies to break somebody out of one versus the other or whatever. So yeah.
Do you have a good example of that?
Of the difference between like an epistemic bubble versus an echo chamber. So like an epistemic bubble might be that like I go to college and I've got a bunch of friends that are conservatives, and then I follow all of them on Facebook, and then on Facebook they post news stories and shit, and I see that like, oh, Hunter Biden, you know, like miters and blah blah blah, and it's just like this is just what's in my feed, and I see it all the time. But it's just like it's an epistemic bubble. Nobody's saying like don't trust any of the Democrats, don't do any of that. This is just like I just happen to see all of this news coming from similar-minded people. But if I were to introduce a person like that to be like, hey, look, like, you know, there's also this too, like you could check this out, or you could look at this, that when they see that, they might be like, oh shit, okay, I'd never even seen this before, I didn't hear about that. They'll maybe be a little dumbfounded. But for an echo chamber, so like what Sneako's in right now, right? An echo chamber, not only does an echo chamber rely on an epistemic bubble where you only get sources of information from one point of view, outside sources are actively discredited. So I think one of the examples the paper gives is like the way that Rush Limbaugh, for instance, would create his own vernacular. So having like code words for people, like I think Rush Limbaugh might have created the term SJW, I think. But that was the example they gave in the paper, at least. But like you're actively, basically what it is you can't introduce a person in an echo chamber to more information, because when they see that, they've already developed schema to discredit that information, right? Like, well, I know the vaccine makes you grow wings. Okay, well, look at this study from the CDC. Of course the CDC is going to lie about it. The fact that they have that study like even proves more that there's probably harm in it, right? Like it's basically like every single external source of truth is there's an intentional effort to discredit it and invalidate it, so that you can never ever rely. You can only become reliant on certain authoritative sources of epistemic truth, and you'll never see an outside perspective. Because there's an active effort to say that not only is our information correct, every other source of information is by definition incorrect. I can shoot you the paper if you want. It's like 21 pages.
Yeah,
it's not
sure.
too long.
Yeah. I always need more papers, apparently. I definitely noticed that it's difficult when you're in a lot of communities that just like there's so many truisms that people take for granted that aren't actually true, is something I've noticed. And I'm trying to think of an example, but it feels to be that that there are some kind of positions people have that are wrong, but even the act of correcting it kind of works in their favor. So I remember having this argument with someone about Churchill, who I don't like. He didn't seem like a very good guy. But there's this thing that goes around lefty circles that he once ordered the use of chemical weapons in Iraq, right? That sounds really, really bad. And there's the quote that's always, if you ever see it on a lefty source, you'll always see the quote begins mid-sentence of him saying it would spread a lively terror amongst the masses. You read the full paragraph, he's talking about tear gas for rioters. And the purpose of using tear gas over other weapons was that it would like disperse the crowd and stop the protest without killing anyone.
Sure.
Like with causing minimal. Like, so he's actually trying to like crowd control in a non-lethal way. But you bring that up, and it's like the response is always, "Oh, you're defending the imperialist Churchill now." I'm like, okay, fuck.
No.
I do it. Yeah, I'd really frustrate. Yeah, but I feel like for so many different things that happen there, like, that's usually the place you end up in, which is why I also don't know if there's an example for it with the Ana Kasparian drama, but like trying to confront any like lefty community with that stuff just makes it so
it's
annoying, right? Because like the whole thing what she's saying about puberty blockers, right? Like I don't know how correct Jesse Singal is about everything there, but because it sounds a little bit like what a right-winger might say, then it becomes the right-wing talking point.
Yeah. Jeez, I wonder what the online stuff is going to look like as more people are kind of swinging. Like for Anna to kind of be like moving in that direction, right? Is kind of wild, you know.
Yeah.
It was funny because somebody linked me a short clip, like a 15-second clip of Anna saying that she warned Jenk not to talk to me because of the Rittenhouse stuff. And when that was linked to me initially, it sounded like she was like, "Oh, like Destiny's insane, blah 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 blah." But then when I watched the full interview of her with Adam and Sidge, I was surprised to find out that the reason why she didn't want him to talk to me about it is because she thought the combo would go bad because she thinks that Jenk is wrong on it. That she thinks what Rittenhouse did was clearly self-defense. So I was like, "Holy shit, that was not an Anna opinion I was ready for."
I mean, okay, I'm not gonna name names because I'm loyal, but over the last year and a half, whenever I've had any run-in with lefty communities over any of these issues, like whether it was the trans genocide or Palestine or Rittenhouse, whatever, like every single time, the Queen's death, every time it happens, out of fucking nowhere, at least one or two or three, depending on the issue, lefty creators, like video essayists or whatever, will message me and say that they like that they side with my position. But they're not going to say anything publicly.
I've talked to two different people about this recently. I hate those types. If you, just as a heads up, guys, if you ever do this to me, I hate you. Content creators that message you and they're like, "Yo, I know that you're catching a lot of heat right now, but I want you to know that I support you." Kill yourself. It doesn't mean shit if you send that to me in a DM. If you're not going to support me publicly, then you don't support me at all. Get the out of here with that like behind the scenes shit. Like you're just trying to maintain the bridge, but you're too much of a coward to actually stake a position on this video.
Okay, it's depending on what position you're in, that's like you could say that, but again, like for some people, like it's the difference between like having a career and shit, like, and it's also just
sure, but
like,
you're also
you might
like,
not be saying something different publicly. You might just be like, you don't think you're just not going to say the issue, like bring it up.
Sure,
right?
but then you reinforce the problem because you make it seem like there's so much more consolidation around an actual position than there really is, you know?
Well, I don't want anyone to kill themselves, but like it is quite telling, I think, that I think it shows you that like the online left communities they're in such a way that like you can't really stay in them forever, I don't think.
Yeah, because the
it's not
purity
very
testing
easy
is
to stay
insane.
in them forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what the backlash to that looks like, I don't know. Whether it means people just go to the far right, or like like conservatives just gain a bunch of people, or there does grow this kind of like left that actually is a bit more sensible and less full of shit. I don't know.
Yeah, I hope so, but it's hard because like usually when people deal with shit like that, usually they just go to the other side, which is like the scariest thing. Like hopefully Anna doesn't become like a quote unquote centrist or like be like a center right person, you know?
Yeah, but that's again, like I don't know how, like when I see other people do it, I don't know how much is affected by career stuff, but like I know for me it didn't help like at all. It was actually like really, I think it's actually been really damaging because I feel like I'm too far left to bring a bunch of conservatives over with the arguments I have, or the like times when I go off the orthodoxy, but then not left enough for the people I've just fought with, you know?
Yeah.
And that's like a really awkward place to be.
Yeah, I feel like with online media right now, I feel like center-left people and center-right people don't have much of a voice, but center-right people, I think, have the Daily Wire, which is probably nice for them. And I feel like center-left people probably have, like, there's more mainstream, like, the 538 people and, like, Pod Save America and shit. Like, like, probably feel like they have some kind of a voice. I guess they're just not in, like, the more online communities. We just don't see those people as much.
I mean, it makes sense because people come online to get away from stuff that you can already find in the mainstream, right?
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
Then as soon as you have a position that aligns more with the mainstream than what they are looking for, then you've just become like everything that they came to the internet to avoid, right?
Yeah.
I feel way too Scottish to see Daily Wire as center-right. Is that the case in America, or...?
I mean, just in terms of like overall where they sit, like they're not like ardent Trump supporters. They're not like fascists. I think they don't push, generally speaking, they don't push as much on like the vaccine conspiracies or the stolen election narrative, like the big MAGA people. I think that like people like Steven Crowder is probably the biggest like to the right of the Daily Wire. And then like all of your alternative medias, like your OANs and all that shit. I don't even know how big they are anymore. But like,
it was so weird seeing because the last Ben Shapiro video I watched, he was talking like about, it was a Pride Month, and he's like, oh, today we're celebrating sodomy. I'm like, holy shit, like fucking biblical language and all that. But I guess like in America, if like that, because like if someone said that in the UK, I think they would just be right, like not far right, or not center right.
Sure.
But,
well, I mean, like when I say center right, I mean right, I guess, right? Because like right is
okay.
Yeah. So they're right wing. They're not like I wouldn't. Yeah, actually, that's true. I wouldn't consider them like center right, but I would call them right. But I guess something in my mind, like Trump, it's hard because it sounds silly to call Trump supporters far right when I think Trump supporters comprise like the majority of the Republican Party right now. So it's hard to call them like far right. That just seems to be like the right position. Like if you meet an average person, they probably are a Trump supporter. So yeah, but our political paradigm is like super right now in the United States.
Yeah, because I feel like America used to have a center right, but they don't really anymore. Because like now it would just be like what, rhinos. That's what they would be,
or like
neocons or like Bush era people.
Nah, people don't even use the term rhino anymore because it implies they have an allegiance to the Republicans and they want to protect the Republican name. Rhino is there to make Republicans pure. Now they just say, oh, you're a filthy, like, you're an establishment person, you're a Republican. You like, I'm not a Republican, I follow Trump, you know? Like, Trump fans don't give a f about the Republican Party or the Republican name. They just care about Donald Trump. They're like a MAGA person or whatever.
I did not know that. Do you think the Ana thing is like a breaking point, or do you think it's just going to be like, because what I usually see happening is when people fall out with the left is that they kind of, it lasts for a little bit, but then somehow they either find their way back in, or they just, like you said, maybe become like centrists or center-right people. Because I feel like with the thing I found weird about watching it happen with Vosh and ContraPoints especially was that they would have their like fallout with the left, but then they would sort of like find a way back in on
another niche issue that they can agree with the left on.
I don't know.
I have no idea. People seem to have a lot of animosity for the Young Turks and for Ana right now. And I think it hurts too that Ana is a little bit older and she's more grounded in reality, so it's hard for her to buy into a lot of the like our unhoused neighbors and like crime isn't a big deal and like all these things like probably are a lot harder for her to get on board with. But who knows? We'll see. Hopefully, like, the animosity shit doesn't push, like, all of the Young Turks, like, to become, like, a centrist news outlet or something. Like, it's probably important that we have some left-leaning outlets, even if I don't agree with them on almost anything.
Yeah, I think I first watched Young Turks in, like, 2012. I was never really a fan of them, just because, like, their style is just not really for me, but I think there is something admirable about Cenk getting like ratioed on every tweet and just constantly going in front of the camera. It's like, I don't back down. Really
yeah, dude, Cenk is super hard-headed, which I respect. Yeah, I do love that about him.
He's like the uncle that screams at you over the dinner table, but then they're like they'll always love you, you know?
Yeah, maybe. I was gonna say he's like the anti-Hassan, whereas Hassan is like gonna print like every single mainstream progressive opinion you could possibly ever have. Like Cenk will like disagree on something and then talk about that disagreement for like 2 days and like tweet about it, talk about it on her show, and get mad over it and just like move on. This is like, yeah.
Well, that's what I wonder as well, because I feel like you get caught in this thing where an issue that maybe isn't like at the front of what's that important to you, but like it gets made into one, because I don't think Anna ever thought that the birthing person was going to become a huge thing, right? I feel like it's quite easy to say that birthing person is a bit silly.
Yeah.
Probably don't need that. Like
This
if I
is
say
going to be the
African
thing you
American
hang
issues,
your hat on for your career. Yeah.
yeah, like if I say African American issues, no one is stopping to scratch their head and be like, oh, are you talking about like the Egyptian billionaire that lives in California? Like, no, obviously not, dipshit. But now that she keeps having to like, because she's probably getting flooded with attacks on that issue, she talks about it more, and then now the response is, why are you so obsessed with this minor issue? I'm like, oh god, yeah. It's really
Pretty cringe.
yeah. And I was gonna talk about the Jewish stuff, but then I've also been doing quite a lot of reading on violence in the Civil Rights Act, Civil Rights Movement.
Yeah, hit me up. Wait, real quick. Can you sell me on Malcom X?
No. Maybe a bit more than you might say.
I think so, because I started, especially on my plane ride back and forth, I started reading a lot more on, because I thought I was going to have a debate on it. I started reading a lot more on civil rights, on what happened in Albany, Montgomery, Selma, like a lot of the stuff that was going on with MLK and all this shit, the Birmingham stuff. And I'm going to be honest, I also tried to look up like stuff related to Malcolm X. Did he accomplish, this sounds really bad, but like, was he an important figure in the civil rights movement? That sounds so mean to say, I'm sorry.
Yeah, he was important, but at the end of the day,
did he get anything done?
MLK got the legislation passed.
Yeah, because I feel like Malcolm X's entire life led up to the end of him being like, you know what, maybe this actually isn't the way to go. And then I'm pretty sure like the Nation of Islam killed him, and then it was like, okay.
Yeah, so he was Nation of Islam all the way up until what, like 64, and then he them off, and I think he was still a black nationalist after that, but it kind of sounds like he was just kind of on his own journey, whilst MLK was quite consistent throughout the whole thing.
But something I didn't parrot that talking point without the proper background to say so, like a retard, that other people parrot that like, well, MLK was pretty important, but like people like Malcolm X were like what really made it work, because there was that, you know, the violence and the peace together. But it really seems like these figures were largely irrelevant when it came to like being effective for legislation. But go ahead, tell me. Yeah.
So I've read a few academic papers on this, and like I still have about 4 left that I've managed to find. This idea that there was a dual strategy of violence and non-violence is not taken seriously by anyone, as far as I know, in academia.
Sure.
There was one paper I found that is trying to give more credence to the idea that, well, first of all, the only violence that actually like definitely helped the civil rights movement was the violence of police officers and sheriffs and the Klan, right?
Sure.
Like Bull Connor and shit.
Yeah.
But I think what did help, and there's even the author who says this, by the way, this is in 2016, and the author claims to be the first person to make this case, like academically, that what helped with Malcolm X and the Black nationalists wasn't so much that this like a strategy of violence, but a threat of violence. So. And I think that's quite logical, because if you think about the whole MLK strategy of like, you start with negotiating, if that fails, you do the self-purification and you prepare people, and then you go with your non-violent marches. Like there's this kind of state, like a procedure before like you actually even resort to civil disobedience. But then after that, if you do civil disobedience for like 10 years and the state still ignores you and the cops still keep attacking you, well then, maybe you probably will go to violence. Yeah. So it's more that like it's and the author who says this is kind of like admits that he's only going off of circumstantial evidence, but I think some of it is like a little bit convincing. So he goes through talks that like JFK had about like constantly talking about the threat that there was like there's a big bitterness in the atmosphere across the whole country that that there were riots happening, and if we don't do something there are going to be more. And even when Malcolm X was out with the Nation of Islam, he started to change his message to that as well. He would actually say in his, I think it was a speech that he gave in Selma, where like not long before he died, where he essentially said that I'm basically here to like remind the authorities of what will happen if people don't listen to MLK, right? I think when MLK was in jail, he like Malcolm X like he had this talk with
you
King's
say that
wife,
speech. I'd be interested in reading it, because my understanding is I don't know if did Malcolm X respect MLK at all? Because I feel like when Malcolm X spoke about MLK, I'm pretty sure he called him a coon. Like in the speeches that I saw,
So So this is like when he's out of the Nation of Islam. I think this is 65, yeah, when he's in Selma for the Voting Rights Act. And he says to a reporter, listen to Dr. Martin Luther King, give him what he's asking for, and give it to him fast before some other factions come along and try to do it another way.
Sure.
What he's asking for is right, so that's the ballot. King and his followers are trying to impress the people of the area. They should give the black man the right to vote. They're saying that you'd be smart to listen to King. And I think he even said to... he said, like, the white people should thank God that Dr. King is telling people to be nonviolent, right? And I think even to Martin Luther King's wife, he said, I want Dr. King to know that I didn't come to Selma to make his job difficult. What I did was I came thinking that I could make it easier. If the white people realize what the alternative is, perhaps they'll be more willing to hear him. So
I need to look up more. I don't know if that was a fact or not, but at the very least, I should be aware of those speeches.
But it's interesting that he said that because it's very similar to something that King said in the Birmingham jail letter. There's that bit in the Birmingham jail letter when, oh, by the way, the next time someone uses the white moderate thing to justify some dumb shit, I'm so ready to just make whoever tries to do that to me again themselves, because it's used so dishonestly. There's a whole bit in it where he says that he himself, MLK, feels like, very estranged between complacency of like the black middle classes, but also the hatred and violence of the black nationalists. So you think about, like, if he said a lot of what he was saying in that letter today, people would probably call him
a white moderate. They would say,
they call him a white moderate.
Let me read you this letter from a Birmingham prison about the white moderate, because that's what you are right now, fam.
But there is a bit in there where he does kind of give the same warning as Malcom X, where he did say that that he's like constantly afraid that if the demands of the civil rights movement aren't met, then he's going to lose supporters to the likes of the Nation of Islam. That he can only keep up nonviolence for so long. That's like I can't remember. I'm trying to find the exact thing because my notes are already like 30 pages long. But I'm further convinced that that if the nonviolent efforts don't get support, then millions of black people will, out of frustration and despair, seek solace and security in black nationalist ideologies. And then that would lead to what he called a frightening racial nightmare. So like, at no point is MLK ever saying that this violence is going to be like a good thing. It's just that it might be inevitable if the demands of the civil rights movement aren't met, But as far as I know, there's nothing saying that violence was like a good tactic. It's just the threat of violence might have inspired people like JFK or Lyndon Johnson to push things faster. Do you have does that sell you more in Malcolm X than you were before this?
No, not really, but that's okay. It's not really so. I shouldn't like shout out Malcolm X. That's me. Andy's from my hometown, so shout out to that on Hood. I think that the just the issue that I had was that there is like this weird like. This is like some cringe shit that I'm noticing, okay? I feel like I learned something in high school, and then I feel like I get a little bit older, and then like I'm starting to learn on social media shit that everything I learned in high school was wrong. And then when I dig in and I do more research, I learn that actually it was pretty correct. I think that like I remember when I read about like civil rights, and the little bit I remember from high school, it's like civil rights was all about nonviolence and like don't, no matter what you do, hold arms and don't ever attack the police and blah blah blah. And then I get older and it was like actually it was the really violent the Black Panthers and Malcolm X and all these things. That's what actually frightened people. And I was like, okay. And then when I do, now that I've done a bit more reading and very scant, I haven't researched, this is like 3 hours of reading, right? So I haven't like dug into this a ton by any stretch of the imagination. But now as I dig into it more, it seems like this is something that came up in an argument that I had with Pisco too, and I didn't have the language for this yet over the Ana Kasparian tweet, that not the principle of nonviolence is way different than not being violent. That those two things are like, they're a completely different thing. And that the tactics that were employed by both sides of civil rights seemed to revolve around that concept of nonviolence and how important it was to show videos of your ass getting beat by the other side without you doing anything wrong. That was before I think before Birmingham, there was Martin Luther King's movement was losing steam because they had just failed pretty fantastically in I think it was the Albany movement. And as I was reading through this, one of the reasons why they think that movement failed was because the police on the opposite side of that movement had become familiar with Martin Luther King's tactics, and they explicitly avoided at all costs having violent confrontations with protesters. So they expanded the prisons, they started moving people around to different jails in the county. They did everything they could to lock up protesters peacefully. But once they got to Birmingham, you mentioned Connor the Bull, whatever the fuck that guy's last name was. That dude was ruthless. And not only was he ruthless, people that were MLK's allies, because they were having a hard time getting citizens to be like ideologically united, they did the incredibly controversial tactic that MLK I don't even think was on board with initially, of going into schools and training high schoolers and shit to like, you guys are gonna march, you're gonna get your ass beat, you're gonna get eaten up by dogs, and that's what's gonna like make this work. And that's essentially what they did. But that there was like this weird like psychological warfare on both sides of like, all I need to do, I just have to get pictures and videos of you being mean to my people without us actually being mean to you, and then we win. And like, that's it. Yeah. That was like the goal. And I didn't realize that like the nonviolence principle stuff was like that hyper focused on like that. It really is that specific of like, we're going to be nonviolent. We're going to show us like just standing here, literally the kumbaya shit, and we want you to beat the shit out of us. And then we're going to go like, we're going to get clips viral on TikTok worldwide, and we're going to get the Civil Rights Act passed. Like that was like, it seemed literally that was, the strategy.
Yeah, they called it self-purification. They would spend like weeks and months preparing young people to get like to just constantly remind themselves like, can I take a hit from the police without hitting back? And like gathering all the knives and shit like that. But the fact that they called it self-purification is like to not hit back to cops. Yeah. Again, it's like people would just call that tone policing or whatever the fuck. Yeah. I think even like JFK made a joke to this to one of the civil rights leaders, which is that like he was basically saying like you shouldn't really be that harsh on the Bull Connor because he's probably done like more for civil rights than almost everyone else. Yeah.
Yes, I remember reading that exact quote actually. Yeah, it was a very edgy quote, but yeah, that the civil rights movement might owe a lot to the Bull Connor. Yeah, because he literally everything up hardcore because they were using fire hoses on like school children. They were sicking German shepherds on school children, and those clips went viral worldwide. Like everybody around the world saw how fucking horrible that was.
And it was the same thing with Sheriff Clark for the Voting Rights Act, right? Like he had like Klanmen helping him, and everyone saw that for what it was. Yeah. So yeah, the fact that it's just like clip farming, right?
Yeah, it's irritating now because like so many lefties online are like, they're trying to whitewash the Civil Rights Act. In reality, it was like brave Antifa warriors that did it. It was all the violence. And it's like, not only do we know today empirically, with BLM that didn't work. And like we all saw it in real time, right? Like George Floyd galvanized the nation because you just saw like a black dude getting like killed by a cop for it didn't seem like a good reason. And same thing with BLM when you saw people getting attacked. But on the flip side, right? Look at like Kenosha, for instance. I think you can make an argument that both sides of Kenosha were mobilized by the same type of violent on nonviolent action, right? You had the initial reporting of Jacob Blake getting shot in the back, which was horrible. And then I had at least one person, I think one person from Kenosha emailed me, I should fact check this, but he said that one of the biggest reasons why the Facebook groups were posting ads trying to recruit people to go and help defend Kenosha was because of the viral video of that one. There was like a store owner outside one of the stores in Kenosha. I think it was getting beaten up with a fire extinguisher. Do you remember this at all?
The person who was trying to put out a fire, wasn't
I think
it?
So, yeah. And then I think he got his ass beat by protesters. And he said that video is what encouraged so many people to move into Kenosha to do like the counter protesting or whatever. So yeah, it seems like it's a similar thing on both sides that generally when look at how much sympathy, like an impossibility is sympathy from people on the left for police officers was watching the police officers getting their ass whipped on January 6th. That's probably the only time in U.S. history, that you had people on the left who had like massive amounts of sympathy for police officers.
I think my partner at the time, who is a massive like ACAB anarchist, was like watching that video of the cop like PTSD crying and shit, like saying just like stop making me sympathize with cops while we were watching that.
I think it's really just funny. It's impossible, and it's funny not to I am a natural MLK But like, it's funny when I compare it to like my debate strategies, is one of the things that I talk about a lot that I kind of figured out is that like, if you're going to go really hard on somebody, you have to earn it first. Like they have to do the first shot. But if you ever start laying into people, even if they're a little bit mean, you have to earn that and you have to earn it by them acting shitty first. But if you go first, even if they kind of deserve it, it doesn't matter. You always look bad. You always look bad. And it seems like for a lot of the principles of nonviolence or protests and everything, it's the exact same principle.
Yeah, and I think I just wonder, like, the problem is if there was never the threat of there being any violence, because that's the kind of thing I'm trying to humor, I guess, is that if legislators like JFK and Lyndon Johnson or whoever just knew that it would only ever be nonviolence, like if people like MLK would just go get the shit beaten out of them by cops and then just try again and try again and try again for like decades, and that would never lead to anything else, like, would that have like motivated them to push legislation still, or do you think that? Or for example, like when one of the senators who was trying to push the civil rights bill through was saying things like that there's like that they were worried about the rioting is going to like set off a bunch of like small Algerias in the country, and Algeria just means like a fuckload of violence, basically. Yeah.
I think that I feel like you appeal to people's humanity. Like you said, it's really, really, really hard to watch somebody like getting killed or getting beat or getting attacked by the cops if they're not doing anything wrong. I think it requires an inhuman level of psychopathy to watch that and not feel any sort of like desire to act or change when you see stuff like that. And I feel like that's played out several times in our country, and I think we all kind of, yeah.
Do you think, so I'd imagine obviously for achieving political goals, do you think there's ever situations where, well, there must be, right, to use violence?
I mean, if that's all you have left, I mean, like we can argue that, I mean, I'm sure there are times like the Civil War was probably necessary, right? The Revolutionary War was probably necessary, right?
It's usually the case that like, because I think maybe some counterexamples would be like South Africa, right? Like Mandela was, like people accused him of being a terrorist, but like, the ANC did literally just like blow up power lines and shit like that, and they did actually kill a lot of civilians as well, which they later apologized for. But I don't think they ever ruled out violence until like even whilst the apartheid negotiations were still going on. Like Mandela never fully ruled out violence until it was over. So, but I think the argument there is that you're in such a different situation when it comes to like how much recourse you have otherwise, because apartheid South Africa had like a lot less room for peaceful protest than somewhere like America did.
I wonder if in the United States, it was important too that like you had like the North, that you saw that there were black people that lived like much different lives in the North than they lived in the South, and that seeing that like, well, it does work in some places. It doesn't have to be like the most horrible Jim Crow laws, the most shit everywhere, like, and it seems to work well. I wonder if that helps.
Probably, but also even outside of the country as well, where you've got people like Castro saying, look at America, where they still have like, because I think Castro and his propaganda used that a lot. Like he used the lack of civil rights and the violence against civil rights protesters in his speeches a lot to make people anti-America. And especially since at that time, America is trying to win allies across Africa and the Middle East away from the Soviet Union, and these are countries that have a lot of black people in them. So it doesn't look very good if you're still having like that situation where people can't even vote in the South. Yeah,
I don't know.
But that's also, that kind of goes to again towards just like other motivations, like trying to win hearts and minds around the world rather than violence.
Yeah, and it's hard to measure like how much of what is actually having an impact, right? Like it's hard to say for sure,
Yeah, so I don't really, I really find it quite difficult to see I need to look more into Malcom X and what he was doing throughout that time, but it just seems to be that he was very popular for kind of illustrating the bitterness of black Americans at the time.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, he wasn't there at the end with the pen, like signing legislation and shit. Yeah.
Sure.
But I'm probably going to read a bit more of it, and maybe I'm trying to think of a provocative like way to push a video like this, like that if MLK were alive today, like Twitter leftists would be calling him a cuck. But that's true a lot of leaders. It's true of like Mandela as well, completely.
Sure. You could name it like MLK and the importance of the white moderate or something.
True.
For the people that vote, if you really want to be edgy, yeah.
It's just the fact that like the white moderate he's talking about is people who were upset that he had like broken segregation laws and
Yeah.
protested without a permit. It's like, how many fucking liberals are going to say that you should, or even centrists are going to say that you could never
Yeah, like
protest
I think
without
that's
a
an
permit?
issue. Yeah, like the white moderate that he's speaking about, where white moderates who are like, yeah, you know, like it's a little bit kind of irritating to try to push for like desegregation and stuff. So like, let's just stay segregated, and like maybe in 100 years we can revisit this topic. Like the white moderates would have like been considerably off of where we would consider civil rights to be today, you know. But yeah.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, they would, in this day and age, they would have just taken the position of right wingers, because I don't even know if like
Do you think that Trump is used
liberals
as a threat
oppose the
by people
idea
like
of,
Biden or Bernie as a way to pass bipartisan
because it's like the idea of like a
legislation?
just
Or
law
perhaps
and an
other
unjust
goals?
law, right? Like, I feel like that's quite that most people are behind that in one way or another. Like, people who take drugs and shit. I don't know.
Based. Wait, hold on.
I noticed
Are you Jewish at all? Why did I think you were Jewish? Are you?
because I've got a big nose. I don't know. I get that a lot. So
I feel
but
like
no,
you
I'm not
said it
Jewish.
at one point. Okay, never mind. Sorry, what were you saying?
I noticed there's a lot of Reddit discourse around your Fuentes debate.
Oh, the first one, dude, I had a day and a half to prepare for it, and I've had like unbelievably fucking retarded relationship drama going on in like the background of my life for like the past week for a variety of reasons, plus drama with other things going on. My friend almost like fucking had a heart attack here when there was like fucking creepos in my community like digging through. It's just like so much random shit in the background, plus all my streaming stuff, like a million other things. So on top of all of that, the limited amount of research that I did for that debate was like mainly focusing on like the Holocaust. So I had like no background going in. Yeah. I think despite everything, I feel like I think on like the fact, I feel like I did okay, like 55-45, or maybe if I'm like more charitable, maybe like 50-50. But like obviously you're having like a Nazi debate. It doesn't feel good to go 50-50 on that platform, especially when he's factually so wrong about so much. Like I spent like 5 minutes reading about like the first and second Gulf War and like the Iran-Iraq war, and I'm like, oh god, everything he said was made up. Yeah, it is just, that triggers me. But I mean,
I think what he said about Libya was like, oh, we went in there to make them more democratic.
oh yeah, I remember trying to interrupt him because I wanted to argue that. I was like, yeah. But there were like so many things, even with like I wouldn't say limited foreign policy. I know an okay amount of foreign policy in geography around like the Middle East now. He tried to get me on not knowing where like Azerbaijan was or whatever. I know, but like, even knowing a little bit was like enough to help me significantly in those combos. But like, oh my god, dude, it's like so many of his talking points, they're not even like, I don't want to like take sides, but like Ryan Dawson is a much more sophisticated like conspiracy theorist, because at the very least, like, he's not going to deny basic reality. He's going to like get in the weeds a lot more. Fuentes really just relies on a very poor and sloppy reading of history and like denial of some like overt facts, you know, like Fuentes would say, like, this would be a Fuentes position. In Syria, Assad didn't gas anybody. A Ryan Dawson position would be, well, in Syria, Assad probably did gas some people. However, the rebels probably got a hold of some too, and in order to win public support for them, they probably gassed their own people at least once because they knew that they weren't going to get support. Like, that would be like a Ryan Dawson position, which is a lot more sophisticated and nuanced and hard to attack. Whereas Fuentes' position is just fucking wacky shit. And it just relies on you knowing nothing about history to defend it,
I think, because this conspiracy theory on Syria is like, it's over one attack. It's not over like that's like the broad one. Yeah. But I feel like when it comes to especially any Middle East stuff or just any even most foreign policy, is I feel like extremists are so. I think a lot of them know that audiences just either don't care enough to know enough about those parts of the world, so they can get away with a lot more, right? I've definitely had that experience with it as well. I think maybe from like a debate perspective or just someone on the outside, I think he probably came off as like, I think he looked more informed than you on a lot of stuff, but but that's because a lot of it's just like bullet points and with a lot of myths. But I think the thing he was asking you about, I feel like there are a few areas that whole thing about like Israel controlling Western foreign policy, right? I feel like there's quite a few very basic things that kind of cut through that really, really easily. And I just wanted to see what you thought of them. Like, the idea, first of all, that like he says Zionism has like a huge influence over American foreign policy. I guess the first thing you could point out then is like, why has that not been a constant, right? America didn't always support Israel in the way that it does now. In the Suez Canal crisis, America condemned Israel pretty harshly for them moving into Egypt. but it was, and then in the 70s, America had to get like basically begged to provide aid when Israel was getting attacked on two sides by Syria and Egypt. And then it kind of seemed to be like more in the late 70s, early 80s with, I guess, a combination of Israel getting attacked a lot more or facing a lot more hostility, but also the fact that I don't think it's actually that controversial to say that Zionism has a lot of control over American foreign policy, but a lot of that's to do with Christianity as well, like Christian Zionism.
Sure, but
with the
I
birth
think
of the
that
new right in the 80s, like that was like a big thing with Reagan, especially that Christians in America who like the evangelical wing are really weird because they're not like, they don't like Jews. They're quite anti-Semitic, but they love Israel. Like Glenn Beck was a really good example of that.
I wish that it was possible because I think for a lot of these younger people, they just don't realize the fervent like support for Israel, because I don't think my parents like Jews. I don't know. I don't think they hate Jews, but oh my God, dude, growing up, every neoconservative loved Israel. They're like, they're the only peaceful nation in the Middle East. Like it's the most important thing in the world that we defend. They're the only democracy in the Middle East. Everybody is evil and terrorists, and our Jewish allies, the Israelites, they're the most important. Like I heard that so much growing up. That's why I said, I think I said in my Dominican thing, I was like, basically any single person who's politically active over the age of 40 in the United States is probably going to be like an ardent supporter of Israel. That's just like the politics of the United States. One thing that's like frustrating to me that Nick Fuentes, fuck, I just read a retarded comment in chat. I did totally slip my mind. Just kidding. Go ahead. Oh, I might remember later.
Yeah, there's the whole thing about, so I don't think, because like obviously if someone comes to you and says, like, okay.
Sorry, I just remembered it. One thing that was really frustrating, I've tried to define this a couple times, is the Jewish question is not that like there are some Jews in the United States that have preferences and like sometimes the United States' foreign policy aligns with Israel. That's not the JQ. The JQ is that there are Jewish people that are subverting U.S. foreign policy to the detriment of the United States and to the benefit of Israel. And I don't like that at the end of the debate, Nick basically completely abandoned the JQ in favor of that very light version that there's not really anything that surprising or even wrong with it. That like some Jewish people in the United States might have like they have like an elite, not an allegiance for, but like a preference to like maintain good relations with Israel. I don't know how he like is allowed to just like take on such a soft position and like feel okay about it. It feels really stupid to me.
Yeah, it's also just like, America gives like a lot of foreign aid to Israel, but you know, like we also, America also gives foreign aid to Lebanon and
Africa and like the entire like the entire world. Like the U.S. does a fuck ton of foreign aid.
Yeah, and with Lebanon, it's not just Hezbollah. Sometimes Lebanese soldiers, like the official army, will just like go astray and attack Israelis. Like, so it's kind of weird that America would be giving them money as well, if it was just to the detriment of the United States. But I think like one thing about foreign policy that I think could have come up was reasons countries support other countries, and I think a lot of it is that a country might have an original reason for allying with another state, but then that reason might go away. But the fact that they allied in the first place starts building up more reasons for them to stay allies in the future. Sure. So people always say, oh, NATO was supposed to be to keep out the supposed to be a wall against the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union's gone. Why do we still need NATO? Well, we need NATO because Russia attacks, still attacks countries, and like lots of other reasons. Yeah,
and being in NATO is a really good way to not get attacked by anybody.
So like just because the original reason's gone, and I think with Israel, one very big reason for the United States starting to get involved with Israel was like the one state that they could support that would kind of stay the Soviet Union's influence in that area, because the Soviet Union they supported like Assad in Syria and fucking
and I mean even like the Afghan civil war, right? Like when we poured money into there, was that at the behest of Israel? I actually don't know. Was it? Because my understanding was that was just we were just supporting the opposition there to the Soviet backed government.
It was the opposition. It was because there was containment policy.
Yeah, exactly.
If they're communists, you support the opposition. And there were all these like the Arab socialists like Assad's dad and shit. Like, and just because the Soviet Union's not there anymore and communism's definitely not in the Middle East anymore, like it's Assad's son who's in power now. So a lot of that still stays, even though the original reason is gone. And then also as part of America helping Israel in the 40s and 50s, another reason for that as well is like, do you know that the Soviet Union was actually the first country to give de jure recognition to Israel?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Israel. Yeah, they were the first ones. Not America. So obviously America sees that, and then like Suez Canal and all like is quite important, so they kind of want to have like some presence there, like in that area. But as they're supporting Israel, then throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, Israel gets attacked multiple times, and then that also means that Israel needs to give a bunch of fucking there's a lot of military focus to aid to Israel, and then that means that Israel basically becomes like a tiny little military base, and they become very good at military stuff. And then I think even to this day, because of that initial support, like Israeli military intelligence and research and development is like very important to the United States, because they seem to innovate in quite good ways when it comes to military stuff. And
yeah, I had at least one person contact me and list me like 6 or 7 different like huge benefits that the United States has from intelligence gathered from Israeli sources, from being able to monitor countries like Iran, like other places in the Middle East, from testing certain types of military technologies, including the Iron Dome, from installations that we used to like spy into Iran and shit. Like, yeah, that there's like a whole, and then there's like some like $50 billion or whatever of trade and shit, and like there are like a decent number of reasons why having Israel as a support, and because it's like a relatively stable country, which is always good too, that it has like U.S. interest, right? The same reason why Putin supports Assad in Syria is because it gives him access to ports, and it's like a relatively stable country, right? Yeah.
I think I also wouldn't downplay the fact that Israelis just look a bit more like Americans. I had a college professor tell me that once, but I think it's actually like because the archetypical Israel is like a white person, you know?
Possibly,
even though half of them are white.
That probably helps a little, yeah, sure.
But it's mostly, I think a lot of it is unintended consequences. I think at the beginning, the United States wants to stay Soviet influence in the area. And then as a result, that friendship builds more and more. I don't think the United States or Israel told the Middle Eastern countries to keep invading Israel or keep attacking Israel, but they did.
No.
And then that meant that Israel got quite good at military stuff. And then the United States likes that. So yeah, that's like...
Yeah, we sell a lot of weapons and shit to them and everything.
Yeah. And I think also with what was the thing about terror attacks from like in Europe, that Israel's intelligence has actually helped to foil a lot of those over the years.
I don't know any specifics, so I wouldn't be able to bring it up, but yeah.
Yeah, it's just like no, I don't think I know either. But I think it was actually to do with Iran. But anyway, the other thing about, because I think I've heard Carantos talk about this, let's maybe see if it comes up again. The idea of do you know much about the Balfour Declaration?
Nope.
That was like the first time when Britain basically promised to give a state to the Jewish people in Israel.
Gotcha.
It was 1917. But people say that, and I think the anti-Semitic version of it is that one of the Rothschilds was involved in it, which he was, but I think he was asked to be. He wasn't like pulling strings or whatever. But I'm starting to come up with a few reasons for why they... But then I guess a question you would ask there is like, if Britain was offering a state to Israel, why then, if it was like because of Jewish control or Jewish power, then why did they like constantly walk back promises and shit like that? Because initially, in the early 1920s, they were offering not just all of historic Palestine, but they were also offering Jordan to the Jews. Mm-hmm. But they were also promising the Arabs other things at the other end, and almost like accidentally playing the two against each other. So it's kind of weird to think that like Jewish control over the United Kingdom or European politics would lead to the British acting in the way that they did, because a lot of Jewish people in Israel before the state was founded were really, really unhappy with the British. There were like terrorist groups who would bomb British buildings in historic Palestine because they were dissatisfied with the amount of help that they were getting.
Yeah, I think one of the things I tried to stress that Nick would bring up like over and over again, like I don't like the idea that sometimes the Jews are like all powerful and can accomplish so much, and then other times they seem like woefully incapable of like getting anything done. But it seems like there's always a reason why. Like even if they get what they want, it's because they wanted to, and if they didn't get what they want, it's because they didn't want it yet. And there's like everything at some point becomes completely unfalsifiable. And there's no smoking gun anywhere either, right? Like none of this. Of course, there's never any evidence for any of this. It's always like, well, this guy was Jewish, and 20 years later we happened to do a thing that was in a document that a Jewish guy like was authored, and it's like, oh, okay, like. It's just like somehow the Jews got the British to promise them an entire state in the Middle East, but they couldn't get any European powers to accept Jewish refugees during the Holocaust, right? Sure, yeah.
Or even they couldn't do, even though I think quite a lot of them wanted to leave. even before the 40s. So yeah. And that was actually a big problem. I think there was one historian who even said that part of what led to the final solution happening the way it did was because the Nazis initially wanted to sell Jewish people to the Allies and no one took them.
Is that true? I'd never heard that before.
It's called the Schacht Ruble negotiations.
Wait,
I think
are you 100% sure of that?
the-
Because I was under the impression that like Hitler was so adamant about like elimination of the Jews that like at points in the final stages of the war, like he was actually diverting military resource and shit away into the death camps because they were so adamant about like the liquidation of.
So this is after it's happened. This
Yeah,
is
yeah,
like
yeah.
after
This
the
would be
fact,
after, yeah. But
before, so 1939, 1940, there's a few things. One was like they were calling it the territorial final solution. That's what Heydrich called it.
oh yeah,
first of
before
all.
they got to the actual final. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Himmler wrote a memorandum where he rejected the idea of mass killing. I mean, Hitler did initially say, he'd already said that annihilation was like an option. He kind of like made that clear. But yeah, the Schacht Ruble negotiations, I think, was when they wanted to send Jewish people over to the Allied states, because the idea was that if a bunch of Jews arrived in the Allied countries, they would start to sympathize with the Nazi cause. They would see all these Jews arrive and they'd be like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Actually don't, yeah. But it's kind of funny to look at just like even the founding of Israel and what like the role that anti-Semitism had there as well, because I don't really know that much about this, but there was like a foreign affairs article that was kind of suggesting that part of what got the British to promise the Jews a state in the first place was actually anti-Semitism as well, was because two reasons. One was that a lot of the original authors of the Balfour Declaration and promising Israel to the Jews was that they just didn't want Jews in Europe anymore. Like,
Yeah,
or
it's
in
the,
the
it's the
UK.
same ideology as like the 4chan containment board. When people make like a special board for furries, it's not because they love furries and they want to make a space
Yeah.
for them. It's because they want them to get the fuck out of all the other boards. Yeah.
But another potential reason, I don't know how sold I am on this, is that potentially, well, we know that the people who wrote the initial Balfour Declaration were anti-Semitic. I think Balfour even said that the Jews had like incredible power over the world and shit like that. And that, like, Churchill was involved. He wasn't very keen on Jews. David Lloyd George wasn't very keen on Jews. But I don't know if I even want to say, but yeah, one of the things I read was that potentially because Britain was doing so badly in the war, that they might have offered a state to Jews because they thought Jews were like powerful enough to help them in World War One. And apparently there is like a historian who's written a book about this, but yeah, I don't know. Potentially. Did you leave? What?
Oh no, sorry. I did blow my nose.
Alright.
My bad.
Okay.
Yeah, I just got up. You were pretty boring. I had to just take the fuck off. You know,
Oh yeah,
go to a line. But now I'm back.
true. Anyway. What do you think you're gonna do more JQ stuff in the future?
I might. We'll see. Wait, when I said
think,
blow my
yeah,
nose,
no-
I mean I was here on my computer. I didn't actually leave.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, okay. Or just because you changed topics. I don't know if you thought I actually just like walked away. Okay. Yeah, and I think against Fuentes and that ilk, I think I probably could, because the conversation was nowhere near as challenging as I expected it to be. Like I said, I'm used to like more thorough conspiracy minded people, but the Fuentes stuff was like pretty surface level. And then his limitations on, especially like foreign policy centering around JQ, were way greater. His limitations were far greater than I expected them to be. I was worried once we got into foreign policy that he was going to just start like running circles around me on everything and I'd be completely lost. But like it didn't seem like he actually had that much depth of knowledge of anything. And he kept running away from like pretty basic questions. So yeah, I don't know. I might dive into it more. We'll see.
Yeah, because like people like Fuentes only care about those parts of the world insofar as they can prove that there's some kind of Jewish influence, right? Like that's yeah. But what was I gonna say? I think the difficult thing about JQ stuff is that it's gone on for so long that there's just so much there's so many different angles that people attack it from. Like if you go to the Middle East, like there's a lot of overlap with JQ stuff there that you'd hear from someone like Fuentes, but it's just there's like so much niche information for like each different area. Like there's even the idea that have you heard the one that like Jews contributed to the rise of the Soviet Union?
I have not, no.
Because a couple of Jewish bankers were giving money to Lenin or some shit, or I think one guy was. And it seems to be the case that if that was happening, it's just like there was so much anti-Semitism under the Tsar that like it would make sense that someone would want to help overthrow that regime. But yeah. But yeah, there's like a whole thing there. There's the whole idea that fucking the Central Committee was full of Jews, and yeah, it goes. There's a lot.
Yeah, I haven't heard it before, so but yeah.
Because I feel like going into a debate with just like that's just the JQ, I feel like you'd want to know. Okay,
I feel like what would happen is like the first few would be rough, and then you do research, and then you go to the next, and eventually what's going to happen is you'll have like a collection of so much historical knowledge or fact that like eventually you'll start to put together like you can argue. I imagine there's going to be some conspiracy theories that you can argue on the spot are probably not true, just because of like having like certain historical facts. Like if somebody were to talk about how like the United Kingdom had a conspiracy theory about how they had like such a powerful ground army that they were able to march to the United States and defeat us. But like if you know that there's an ocean between us, it's like this is obviously not true, right? Or what you just said about like, you know, Jewish people funding. Maybe I wouldn't know that particular thing, but if I happen to know that the Tsar prior to the Soviet Union formation and Lenin and all that, like prior to that, if I knew that they were highly anti-Semitic, then I could probably guess like, well, how do you know they didn't fund it just because they didn't like the anti-Semitism, right? I think after a while you start to weave together enough historical facts, assuming like what you're learning is true, that you should be able to deal with a lot of conspiracy theories because they just don't make sense with the established historical record, you know?
Yeah.
Hopefully.
It happens when you get the with stuff with even with Palestine, with the idea that like when almost 1 million Jews left all the countries in the Middle East and North Africa to join Israel, some people would say like, oh, this was just like the Zionist plan, you know, they were all just like carried over. But then you'd have to also ask like, okay, how much did anti-Semitism in the Middle East contribute to that? Like, why was it that as soon as like 100,000 Jews in Iraq were offered like the opportunity to go to Israel, why did like over 90,000 of them take it immediately? You know, like generally people wouldn't do that right? Unless there's something you're trying to get away from.
I should do more research on Cuba because my Cuban knowledge is actually not that great. But I've always heard similar stories from my mom and dad that like, or from my mom, I should say, that like when Fidel Castro basically offered people the opportunity to take boats and leave Cuba and go to the United States if they wanted to, that there were like tons of people that took that opportunity to just like peace out. And it's like, if it was the case that it was like a communist utopia, like why did so many people take the opportunity to leave? But
what, the gusanos?
True. The slave owners.
I found this really... Was there not a streamer who tried to say that your family were slave owners?
I call Destiny a gusano because he is. Oh, but he's Cuban. This motherfucker has blue eyes. Not that it necessarily matters, but I can definitely tell you that because I can definitely tell you that his family owned a plantation. His family definitely owned slaves. There's a big tell.
Couldn't I just have blue eyes from my dad's side? Like, isn't that how genes work? Couldn't my mom have a recessive allele or whatever? And maybe I do like, why does he? Oh, well, actually, hold on. A lot of them did.
Long time ago.
Whole community, basically every socialist, yeah. Because I have blue eyes and I have like European background, which means that my ancestors were slave owners during the Castro's revolution. And the reason why I'm such a right-wing fascist is because I'm upset that my families were deprived of their plantations and slaves. Yeah.
Kind of racist.
Oh, well, no, because Cuba's a nation. There you go. Or because a worm is just a worm, you know?
What? Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Gotcha. Sorry, I did it backwards.
Based.
Okay.
Nothing I can think of. How are you? What's going on with you? Anything new? What do you do now? Wait, yeah. What are you? Did you move away from full-time content creation, or?
No, I'm just trying to do full-time video essays.
Oh, gotcha.
I don't know how sustainable that might be because I spend like. I just don't like doing a video without working on it for at least like 2 weeks, and that feels like in the YouTube world that's just not, the algorithm just doesn't seem very kind to that behavior right now. I don't know. But maybe. I feel like I've got about 6 topics that I want to go into, but they're all like very deep dives. There's either a lot of papers or a lot of fucking books to read, so I don't know.
Sure. Find the you gotta find the stuff that's like politically relevant, especially with our election season. It's still a bit away, but as it comes on, hopefully you get more hits for stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I know that civil rights stuff might be relevant for another like week or two. I don't know if people will care by then. But yeah, I don't know. I find it quite difficult to just do anything that's that I'm not already quite interested in.
Sure.
So even though it might be not topical at all, I just want to I like to think, well, maybe I can make it topical, you know?
Sure.
But who knows? That might be a long ways away.